Duncan, hi, and good to see you in 2024. How are
Uh,
you?
Good morning and Happy New Year.
Happy here. Yes, Chinese wood drayton year.
It's
Gong
actually
Sai Ko,
Valentine's Day today. That's how far into the new year we are.
yeah. Well, it's our first program for 2024, so there we are.
All right.
And there's so much going on at the moment, especially in the area around UFOs. And you have two wonderful stories in the current edition of
Hmm.
Nexus, UFO disclosure or deep state disinformation. Now, I have to challenge that headline, deep state disinformation. Only disinformation comes from poor old people like us who are confused about conspiracy theories. The deep state governments, they don't put out misinformation, they put out a narrative. If you challenge that, you're in trouble. So I
Yeah, they
just thought I'd
haven't.
throw that in.
Yeah, they haven't got to the point where they've wanted to criminalise discussions about UFOs, but there are certain parts of the world where it's already a criminal offence to discuss how you don't like all the illegal immigrants being shoved into your town while people are being made helpless. That's in
Hmm.
Ireland. It's a criminal
Well, we
offence
can't
to
do that.
criticise the immigration of Ireland. In parts of Canada, they're suggesting to criminalise denying that carbon dioxide causes climate change. But we haven't got to the point where anyone's proposing to criminalise anything about UFOs or ETs. But watch this space because it may happen. So I think anybody who's listening who's been into the UFO um, topic for any length of time will definitely agree that in terms of the Western mentality, understanding of UFOs and ufology, it started to really ramp up around the 17th of December 2017. And there was a big article in the, I think it's the New York Times or New York Post. And it sort of basically said the government's been studying them. They've got departments or they've got secret organisations which are assessing cases, and the phrase UAP started to emerge not long
Hmm.
after that, standing for Unidentified Aerial Phenomena, which was a umbrella term which includes UFOs, but also anything unidentified that's moving around. So it could be weather related, but I think it was I think the CIA or one of the think tanks decided after processing information that they would slightly control the narrative by changing key aspects of it, which is a preferred tactic.
Hmm.
And in this case, they've taken UFOs and turned it to UAPs, which reduces the giggle factor in terms of anybody in mainstream on media or government, etc. Referring to UAPs, nobody giggles and thinks, oh, it's a bit silly. But if you talk about UFOs, even in Australia, who's way behind everything on the news because we are so censored here in Australia, it's not funny. But yeah, even the other night on one of the TV stations, they were referring to UFOs and all having a bit of a giggle about it. So here we're still giggling about UFOs,
I know.
but the same media
Terrible.
organisation talking about UAPs taken seriously. So hijacking the terminology is part of hijacking the narrative. So there are definitely people who are what I call long time conspiracy theorists. And that basically is underscored by defining them as people who automatically distrust new narratives coming out, especially narratives that you can see are being used to hijack the debate. Now, we live on a planet of billions of people, and for thousands and thousands of years, and possibly millions of years, humans have noticed strange things in the sky. And indeed, humans have long recorded on every continent regular visitations of beings from the sky who've come down to the ground. And sometimes they've been unfriendly, other times they've stayed and taught the locals how to make cities, agriculture, clean the water, raise animals, animal husbandry, agriculture, taught them how to observe the stars in the heavens, and then often left again. Sometimes they stayed around and went into war with other visitors from the sky on another continent. And so we have this history of the planet, which has got, wars between the gods and men. But we all have to acknowledge that at some point in time, the gods left or were kicked off. And so you're given the choice of wondering whether they were all just mythological things that didn't exist in the first place, or has there been a very complex past where Earth's history has been literally dictated by the arrival and going and the machinations and the politics between what we would call visitors from the sky coming to Earth with their advanced technology. Now, it's pretty clear in terms of, if you do a global assessment, that that's really what's happened. There's been different civilizations have visited us. I think we are literally pawns in the game, and a lot of those civilizations have clashed between each other rather than come here to fight humans. I mean, how do you fight? I mean, if you're an alien and you've got ray guns, there's no fight with humans. You just fly over and fry them if that's what you want to do.
Yeah.
But I think it's a lot more complex. So bearing that in mind, it's a bit cute to assume that we're not going to have the truth until the US government, not the UK or Australian or the Norwegian or the Chinese or the Indian or the whatever, the US government is, I mean, the word disclosure basically really is defined by people in America or in Western society who are waiting for the US government of all entities to tell you what's going on. And you can imagine that the US government is riddled with factions and departments. Yeah. And we know that there's a lot of congressmen and senators who are basically totally corrupt, and they will do anything they're paid to do and say anything they're paid to say. And it's fair to say that in American politics and geopolitics, most politicians know that there's a level of secrecy above their pay grade. And they know from talking to people in hushed whispers, in rooms, looking around them, this is politicians and generals, they know that it's not worth their job to even ask about what's going on. So what we've seen, incidentally, since the 1990s, is we've seen some of these very powerful politicians, and I include the Rockefellers, the Clintons, and people in the CIA who all know UFOs are coming and going, and they all know somebody in government somewhere has got dealings with them and communications with them, and deals have been made, but they all know they're not in the loop. And so what they've done over the last 30 years is to identify key civilian UFO researchers of good credibility and standing, and then contact them and say, we'll fly you first class with your family, put you up at 5-star hotels. You can stay for a week in this city in America, and we want you to take a whole day and to do a presentation of everything you know about your topic of UFOs. You have to sign secrecy agreements. Your audience is behind the two-way mirrors, so you can't see who is watching you. And so these people basically delivered a talk to an empty room, knowing that they were being watched by very powerful people behind two-way mirrors. And I know this has happened. I know this has happened, even though they've signed security non-disclosure agreements, because I know personally at least 4 or 5 of them, and several of those are now passed on. But one of them was Bruce Cathy. So whoever was doing the decision-making on who to pick to fly over was quite astute. And anybody out there who's into UFOs and has never heard of Bruce Cathy, you should slap yourself on the wrist and go and do some proper research, because
anybody who went to a Nexus conference remembers Bruce. He was wonderful.
Yeah, if you've been involved with Nexus for any length of time, you'll have heard of Bruce Cathy. He's passed on, but he was a New Zealand airline pilot who routinely saw UFOs while flying passengers around, and he reported them to his bosses. And one day the top boss came in and said, look, Bruce, we know that they're flying around. The government knows they're flying around. The military knows they're flying around. But if you want to keep your job, just shut up and forget about it. And he's like, what? Everybody knows? What? This is really important. And so he basically eventually left the aviation and went into full-time research. And he plotted the most incredible unexplained UFO sightings of New Zealand onto a map on the wall, and found that he could draw equidistant lines through them. And then his research went on to propose a type of energy grid running around the planet, which was dependent on the latitude and longitude of the planet at that point. And so, yeah, he was one of the people flown over there. So getting back to this, there is definitely a sense of curiosity from senior politicians in America, because if they get read into the loop, there's more money, more power for them. And unfortunately, we're seeing some of the most corrupt of the politicians, especially from the Democrats. Mind you, the Republicans are just as corrupt. And we're seeing pedophiles like Podesta and Schumer who are circling. And the people out there in the public in the UFO world are seeing this as authenticating. They're seeing these corrupt pedophile politicians as their interest in it as helping to bring on disclosure. And it's just like, why are we putting these absolutely corrupt people on a pedestal just because they want to get their snout into the trough? So, but if you are a person on Twitter, on say hashtag UFO Twitter, you are a typical American being with your emotions being played. You've picked who the goodies are and who the baddies are. And literally, it's another football match. My heroes are these people, and my enemies are the people who are criticising those people. And so, I mean, you could almost say in many parts of social media, there's a big split. And then there are splits within the splits. And some of it goes back to famous American cases like Bob Lazar. Is he genuine? Is he a con man? Is he a grifter? Is he telling half truths or half lies? My personal assessment, which changed from the initial days, when the internet kicked in, because Bob Lazar came out before the internet really kicked in, and he made a lot of statements thinking no one's ever going to get a chance to check on these. Nobody's going to drive to a library and go through, newspaper archives and check on this. Nobody's going to drive to a university and sit there and make an appointment and go through education files of people. The internet kicked in. People could do a lot of this. And some of the early stuff Bob Lazar said was exposed as outright lies. But anyway, regardless of whether he's real or not, Bob Lazar has made it into probably mainstream consciousness. He got on the Joe Rogan show with Jeremy Corbell, the guy with the beard. And now Jeremy Corbell is probably as famous as Bob Lazar and is also now a hero because he's big, he's American, he's got the beard, he talks with bluster and he says, let's drop truth grenades on these politicians. And he uses that sort of language and the Americans love it, because that's where they're at. They've been dumbed down and everything has to be reduced to short attention span, emotional, information nuggets. But does anybody really on UFO Twitter do a deep dive into Bob Lazar's timeline or a deep dive into any of the other key players? Or do the people on UFO Twitter and on social media, have they gone back before 2017 and really investigated anything? Because I see all this new wave of people getting very excited when there's a post about a UFO case from somewhere between Roswell and here. And, it's like, dude, we all knew about that 50 years ago. It's nice to see everyone catching up, but, don't waste too much of your breath thinking that you found something we haven't known before. Yeah. And this is a bit of an issue. Long-standing UFO people are looking at the current disclosure crowd basically going, these are all newbies. And not only newbies, they're lazy newbies, and they don't really want to do any deep dives, don't want to get their heads, don't want to immerse themselves into other perspectives and other narratives, and it's all literally what's coming out of America. Now, I need to backpedal here, and this is not in the articles in this issue, which I'll get to in a minute. But in my decades of research UFOs, and I've travelled the world, I've spoken about UFOs and UFO abductions to senior intelligence people in Libya when Gaddafi was around. Not many people know Louis Farrakhan, the head of the Nation of Islam in America, which has been going for decades. Louis Farrakhan, most Americans will have heard of him, probably. But he's a UFO abductee. They took him up broad daylight. He didn't have to be regressed or hypnotized, and he remembered everything. And the ETs that took him up in a spaceship for half a day basically said, here's 3 possible ways that the planet Earth can go. Choose accordingly. And he's incredibly influential. Basically, all the black Muslims in America are members of the Nation of Islam, and it's not a terrorist organisation. It's always thought to be, to moderate. Technically, Islam is a religion of peace, even though aspects of Islam have been hijacked by the West to create extreme Islam, where they do acts of terror. But ISIS and Al Qaeda were always creations of the UK, US, Israel, French, and NATO empire. They created the terrorist organisations to justify going in with troops to save the local people from the horrible ISIS. But ISIS was definitely and a joint American and Israeli creation. Anyway, we're getting a bit away from the topic.
We are, yeah. Can we go back to UFOs?
I want to go back to this. So we've got, well, in my decades of UFO research and travels, I've spoken to people from quite a few different countries. I've been to Russia and discussed it there. I've read the French Commissar report, which was the highest report issued by the French government military into UFO sightings and stuff in France and French territory, which was considerable back then in the 80s. And I spoke to Professor Sun-Shi Li from China, who literally is VIP status, ambassador status when he visited Australia. He came to speak at a UFO conference, and the people who look after VIPs on an ambassador level in Canberra were freaking out because they hadn't been given notification that this very important Chinese dignitary was visiting Australia. And he was just literally in Brisbane to speak at a UFO conference, I think one of the ones run by Glennis Mackay back in the day. And he did his presentation, and I was astounded to see how many civilians in China at the time were paid up members of UFO groups. You're talking millions. And I said to Sun-Shi Li afterwards in a break, I managed to get a few questions to him. And I said, so why isn't China announcing to the world the presence of UFOs? And he said, well, we've got an agreement with the Americans that they go first. I thought that was very interesting. And then back to the French Commissar report.
When was this?
This would have been in the 90s in Brisbane at a UFO, I think it was labelled a MUFON conference because Glennis, I think, was waving the MUFON flag for that part of Australia. But Professor Sun-Shi Li...
well, things have changed a lot with China since then, haven't they? So.
Well, yes and no, but I mean, agreements are agreements, and most countries stick to them except for America, which is the reason why most of the world has been turning on America and its allies in the last 10 years, and increasingly so in the last 3 years. So you've got a big shift in the geopolitics of the planet at the moment. It's tectonic. Talk about, was it Pluto going into Aquarius? We are definitely seeing old empires come crashing down while new ones are emerging. And the empire which is being isolated at the moment is what I call the Anglo-NATO empire. It's Australia, UK, NATO countries, Britain, Canada, New Zealand, the typical ones. The rest of the world has been controlled and part of that empire, but they're pulling away because they're getting more strength and succor from, coalitions like BRICS, B-R-I-C-S, etc. But in the French Commissar report, right at the very back in the appendix, there's a mention there which basically says the French government is not going to do anything about this on an international stage because it has an agreement with the Americans they will go first. One contact I had with the Vatican indirectly said the Vatican won't go first. It's got an agreement that America goes first. So whether or not I've just got 3 random pieces of information which don't really mean anything, but it's very interesting because, I mean, UFOs are seen regularly all over the planet, all over Russia, all over China, India,
everywhere,
Australia.
Yeah.
It's not just an American thing. And I mean,
and a lot in South America as well.
Oh, in South America, they're seen so often that it's not even a big deal unless they're being attacked by the visitors, and that gets on the news. Or they find a cave full of alien bodies and they try and get them out. But always it's the American, everyone looks to the American Department of Defense. And now recently we've had people who are leaking information, but it's not specific information from within the American security establishment. It's information about aspects of the American security establishment, and people like David Grush, who has come out, and I'm sure everyone who knows who David Grush is, he's mentioned in these articles.
In his article, yeah, but his qualifications have definitely been challenged, shall we say. He's a very late emerging person, isn't he?
Yeah, I mean, he hasn't lied about anything that we can see or detect, and I don't feel that his character and his personality is one of deception. He honestly believes, in my opinion, what he's been reporting.
But then again, some people are accusing him of being a stooge.
Well, it's in the article, and you can read the pros and cons on those accusations for himself. I mean, the best stooge is a person who believes what he's saying, because the sincerity comes through. Now, David Grush basically is a high-level insider who had oversight and was able to see what was going on in several departments, if you like, within the security intelligence establishment. And in the capacity of his role, he became aware of secret black programs where they were working on crashed UFOs, were looking at, dead bodies that had been retrieved from them, and things like that. And I mean, that's nothing new to anybody in ufology. We were hearing that in the 80s.
Oh, yeah.
We were hearing it in
Area
the 90s.
51,
And,
yeah.
and whistleblowers came forward who had, the rank of colonel and stuff. In May 2001, Stephen Greer, who has been blacklisted, and more information has been put out about Stephen Greer to shut him up in the eyes of the rest of ufology than he deserved. I'm not saying Stephen Greer is an angel, but he's not a malicious and deliberate con artist, and he has a lot of credibility, so much so that in May 2001, Stephen Greer got dozens, scores of people from within the military industrial complex, civilian airline pilots, FAA, that's the Federal Aviation Authority, air traffic control people, a couple of astronauts. He got people absolutely highly credentialed, most of whom had signed secrecy agreements in May 2001 at the National Press Club in Washington. So much interest from overseas journalists that the server crashed multiple times, but he got all of those whistleblowers to stand up and deliver their piece. A lot of them have now passed on. But I mean, that should have been the moment we all refer back to as the turning point of the public, not some newspaper article in 2017. But of course, May 2001 was getting a lot of steam, but it was derailed by September 11 in 2001, when they brought down the Twin Towers on an inside job and Tower number 7, and then used that to launch a multi-year war across the Middle East, an illegal war. I mean, I won't go into that. But that was a really big pivotal moment because we were getting somewhere. And it wasn't putting Stephen Greer in the forefront, it was putting individual people with direct personal experience. Now, David Grush has got no direct personal experience with a crashed craft or an alien body, or he wasn't given oversight of a particular unit which did retrievals. He didn't personally see a UFO hovering over missile silos, disabling the missiles, which happened across Russia too, by the way. These are not
just US
sides. Russia's role has been to, if you like, and I don't know, to this day, I don't know whether he has been set up to do this or whether he is a bit out of left field and they're having to do damage control because of it. But Grush has definitely got the ball rolling and got inquiring minds happening. And if anything, since Grush has stepped forward, and I mean, I say this even bearing in mind the articles we're talking about have come out 2 months ago, in that time period, it looks like the security establishment has moved to not diss David Grush, but to cast dispersions on him indirectly. Now, when somebody comes from within the establishment with startling information and gets a lot of media exposure, which he did thanks to people like Ross Coulthart, an Australian journalist who got it right out there. When somebody comes from within a security establishment with a narrative that you would normally think is not supported by the security establishment, you're either thinking, okay, the security establishment is letting information out and it's going to go down this track, this narrative track, which we all watch for because we're all trained to expect the American security establishment to steer the narrative about UFOs to the idea that they're hostile or a potential threat. Now, if you can get...
That way it keeps the public in control, doesn't it?
Well, it's fantastic because if you get it into the public and say, look, Pentagon, look, Congress, look, senators, we've been keeping all this UFO stuff secret for a few decades because we're trying to figure out whether they're friendly, neutral, or hostile. We've been tinkering with their technology, and we can now reveal to you that we've got free energy, anti-gravity, teleportation, and some super mofo ray guns that can, take an aircraft carrier out from the other side of the planet. That's never going to happen, but they have been working in technology, and they've used the power and the money and their stuff basically to keep everybody out, or keep everyone's noses out. So the gap between what they're working on in secret and what the public are being told has been getting wider and wider. And I don't believe when Grush came forward, in retrospect, I believe Grush believed what he was saying, and was sincere, because the security establishment has moved to indirectly neuter him. And they've done this via setting up committees of inquiry and then saying, well, Rush never came to us with his evidence. And Rush is saying, I did so. And they're saying, no, you didn't. And then the guy who says, no, you didn't, is fired. And that's John Kirkpatrick. And so there's this, right now, there's a mess of infighting, backstabbing between the 6 or 7 groups that were set up by various aspects of the security establishment to investigate UAPs, UFOs, or what has been found out by other aspects of the security establishment. So
well,
it's
let's talk about
basically...
Robert Lazar here now, because
Okay.
he's part of that as well, and he is in the mix.
Well, Robert Lazar, I mean, look, I don't believe Robert Lazar is genuine. I think he's a total liar, a con man, a grifter, and I think he's very lucky he's not in jail for murdering his first wife while being married to a second wife, because that's bigamy. And the timing of his first wife's death benefited both him and his second wife incredibly financially. It was a suicide, but there's a lot of weirdness about it. Bob Lazar is a very smart man. He tinkers with explosives, car engines. He's not stupid, but he lied about his credentials. He did work as an electrical contractor in Area 51, that's clear, but he was not a physicist working on anything to do with reverse engineering. What Bob Lazar did do in the 80s, he was the organiser of a semi-legal, personal invite only type of bash in the desert bash, where people bought their hot rod cars and showed them off and raced them. People bought, their latest weapons and blew things up, and fireworks were going off and machine guns were being fired, militaries off jeeps. It was a real guy thing, beer, cocaine, weed. Now and again there'd be a band play, all invitation only. And this is just in the desert outside of Las Vegas. So that's where Lazar met John Lear. I suspect they met George Knapp there. And I suspect...
Now, these are names we're thrown in here. Can you tell our audience who they are?
Oh, well, George Knapp is the journalist who basically made Bob Lazar famous. From memory, sometime in the late 80s, George Knapp had a guest which didn't show up and brought on a mystery guest called Bob Lazar, who was saying, oh, I've been working at a secret government installation, and the one thing about Bob Lazar which gave him credibility is he predicted a particular day when people could go to a certain spot in the desert at a certain time, and you would see strange lights in the sky. And people went there at the appointed time, and those lights in the sky were there, which means Bob Lazar did have some information from the inside. But I'm saying to you that inside information came from scuttlebutt between working at the base and having people who worked at Area 51 going to these desert bashes on the quiet on the side. And I suspect words were, people talk after a few beers and a few smokes.
That's right.
And I don't believe back then the paranoia about the security establishment was so great as it is today, where they're much stricter about who can get to the gates of Area 51, let alone back then. And the other thing to Bob Lazar's credit was he was the first person, apparently, I haven't done a deep dive to check it, but Richard Dolan, a very respected researcher, says, yeah, Bob Lazar was the first person who uttered the words Area 51. But even George Knapp, the respected journalist, whose credibility really is still propping up Bob Lazar to this day. So if Bob Lazar gets outed as a total fraud, George Knapp's credibility will plummet. And he's a number one speaker at every UFO conference. I think George should have come clean a long time ago, because I think George knows the truth. But George Knapp is on record saying there's no way Bob Lazar did any university courses. He hasn't got the attention span. He can't sit still enough. And, and he doesn't have... And plus he wings it. When the other thing Bob Lazar is famous for is talking about element 115 being a type of anti-gravity element. And people who are new to the scene say, oh, well, he spoke about element 115 before anyone else. No, element 115 was in the previous edition of Scientific American magazine, which Bob Lazar obviously picked up on and read. And he probably thought, the internet's not out there. How many people listening to this radio station have ever read Scientific American, and he talked about element 115, and everyone's going, oh, you know, the Messiah, he talked about element 115 before it was talked about in public, but he didn't. And there's quite a few other things too. I mean, forget his, you know, setting up brothels with cameras to catch clients, to use blackmail, selling chemicals and stuff. He made a lot of claims before the internet kicked in, which he'll never be able to explain. And now and again he'll say, "Oh, I don't remember." And of course, you've always got the favourite thing. Oh, the government probably, you know, deleted my files and my records. But no, Bob Lazar is a very cunning operator, and he's very careful with his words. He's had to be very careful with what he's said, because when you lie, you've got to remember your lies. And he's been tripped up several times. And when you're telling the truth all the way, it's consistent, and you can. I mean, I've had to recognise this as a researcher. Sometimes you find, well, I don't want that person to be truthful, but they are, and you've got to recognise consistency when it's there. So Bob Lazar, to his credit, he's probably been used to popularise ufology to Americans, along with, in the same pill, Bob Lazar says UFOs are real. We've got lots of crashed ones. We've got bodies, and we're working on back engineering all of the technology for decades in secret labs. And even the politicians are not privy to this. And that was said back in the 80s. Other whistleblowers came forward and said the same thing. The whole point of the May 2001 press conference was exactly that. You had people who'd signed security agreements saying to the public, if we can be released from our security oaths, we can tell you even more. But if we tell you more than what we've told you, it's an automatic 20-year jail sentence in every country, or 25-year jail sentence in every country that's a signatory to the breaches of National Security Act. And so, yeah, I mean, it's that situation. So David Grush is still a big name, a big player in the field. But I feel for the guy, because I think he's a bit of a football at the moment. Now, prior to David Grush, you had a guy step forward called Lou Elizondo, and he was part of that grouping of called To the Stars Academy, from the rock star Tom DeLonge and a few other people. Now, Tom DeLonge used his... Tom DeLonge
but he put the fear of God into people, didn't he? Tom DeLonge, if you think that aliens are coming here friendly, you're totally mistaken. So
Tom DeLonge, in my opinion, is a typical American. You know, it's like they think when they discover something, they think they're the first to discover it. So Tom DeLonge comes from a well-to-do family. He's a successful rock star from, I forget the name of the band, because I'm not really that much into his music.
No.
But anyway, he obviously got into the topic of UFOs, and he used his... Tom DeLonge's also a Freemason. Quite a few rock stars are Freemasons. Might be interested to know. But because he came from a well-to-do family and he was a Freemason, he called upon his Freemason connections to get interviews with friendly senior military people. And he basically went to them and said, look, I'm a rock star. Why don't we, is there any interest from the US military to lift the public awareness of UFOs and make the public more kindly disposed towards the US military and the US security establishment? And Tom's like, I can make the public be more respectful of you guys instead of automatically hating and mistrusting you. And let's work on some projects together. And anyway, they threw a few CIA and Intel people at him, and Chris Mellon from the Mellon banking family. And I mean, there's a whole lot of names were sort of thrown in. And they put together TTSA, To the Stars Academy, front man Tom DeLonge, and they did a big fundraising thing. You could buy shares and stuff into it. And after about a year, anybody who did a bit of a dive realised that Tom DeLonge was misappropriating the money that had been raised to sort out his own financial mess. And there was a bit of infighting and a bit of mistrust and distrust. Other people are circling around going, how come they're getting all the action and the attention, and maybe they might even get funding that they shouldn't have, but we need. So the whole TTSA sort of went for a while. But in the midst of all that, it brought out a guy, Lou Elizondo, another insider, possibly with personal experience. And Lou Elizondo became more the face of it all, and he appeared on, I think, Ancient Aliens or no, correct me there. I don't think he was on Ancient Aliens, but there was definitely a few UFO documentaries created. And Tom DeLonge was there in the background. Lou Elizondo was more on the forefront, and so you saw Lou Elizondo in a four-wheel drive driving from one part of America to meet up with another person who's got inside information. And they get out and they look around and turn their phones off, and they have a meeting on camera. I mean, the hamming it up for the audience, it just drives me nuts. I'm just thinking, why go through all this fake pretense? You know,
that's Hollywood stuff, isn't it?
It's Hollywood stuff, and it just makes my suspicions go up. But in America, it's like if you don't do that, they won't take any notice of it. All their attention span switches off. It's like there's something wrong with their brains. You've got to have this bullshit decoration on anything before they'll look at it, and before it'll penetrate the layers of stupidity that wrapped around so many of their heads.
So much for you. I
apologise to any Americans out there who feel abused by this. To be honest, half of Australia is like it, especially the ones living in the city. Canada and the UK is not far behind. We're all in lockstep of stupidity. But I guess getting back to it all, the reader or the viewer or the outsider has to discern for themselves how much of what is coming out now is being deliberately released to be steered down the roads of ETs and UFOs are a possible threat. We need more money for more ray guns and more things in space to protect us from possible evil aliens. And like I've said several times on your show, there's only two things left now that you can possibly scare the shit out of humans with so that they will unite and do whatever you tell them. One is a virus that's way worse than, say, Ebola or Marburg put together. Imagine a virus which is highly contagious and you die within 2 hours of getting the virus on you. And not only that, but you die horribly of blood coming out of your eyes, your ears, your nose. And while you're dying, you're screaming and you're coughing and you're spraying blood all over everyone else. And
that gets their attention,
Yeah, if that was happening every time you went to the shopping centre, you would go home and take notice of whatever the authorities were saying in terms of stay at home.
What to do?
It would unite you out of fear. The other thing is evil aliens. All you got to do is get a few man-made UFOs or holograms, blow up a few cities that you wanted to blow up anyway, preferably a friendly one to really ram it home. I mean, after all, Americans killed thousands of their own people on 9/11 to justify getting Americans so angry to get behind the government and go and, bomb somebody. We think it was Osama bin Laden in his cave in Afghanistan. All right, we'll go and bomb him and, bomb the crikey out of him and then get their asses kicked until they're out of Afghanistan. I mean, anyway, we won't go into that.
Won't go down that track, no.
So, I mean, it's unfortunately, it's incumbent upon the outsiders to try and discern who's telling the truth, because the best people to be used are people who believe what they're saying. Because there is an instinctive thing in most people that you can tell whether they're being truthful to a degree or not. And when you believe what you're saying, you're consistent with it, you hold up under cross-examination on news or Senate committees. David Grush is holding up on it. It's like I'm not saying he is, a hero, although a lot of Americans are considering him a hero and Lou Elizondo is a hero, and the people who are got one leg in the deep state, like the Chris Mellons and they're coming down on the side of the baddies because, well, you're rich and powerful and famous and you're from a banking family. And so there's a lot of infighting, a lot of bun fighting, a lot of people trying to position themselves to get media attention on the periphery. And then, of course, you've got 100 YouTube channels and people who are making money out of coming up with sensational headings for a YouTube clip just because they want, Americans and Brits on the internet to rush and watch their video thing, and that gives them their weekly income. So there's a lot of vested interest in having your attention about the UFO issue. And unfortunately, amongst all that vested interest, it's really hard to discern the truth. I mean, people accuse me of having a vested interest because I sell a magazine and it's, $9 or $8.95. that's, you know, I'm making money out of it. And there's a big difference between publishing a magazine with sometimes two sides of a story as opposed to a 15-minute YouTube clip which says, are evil aliens about to take over the US government? And that's just clickbait, and half of the thing is not even about what they've got on the headlines.
No, no.
So it's a bit of a mess out there. And the two articles we've got in the magazine are very very detailed and in depth, and you can get a good perspective. You get to decide whether you believe Grush's authenticity and integrity or not. And the article does have implications of guilt by association. Some of the people that Grush has rubbed shoulders with, law firm he's used, have been used by other despicable people. So, you know, there is a bit of guilt by association thrown at Grush in the process of this. But generally speaking, I feel in retrospect he's been honest and consistent, but I think he's a bit of a football. And I think when Grush emerged with what he said, I don't think the American security establishment is that happy with him. I think they would prefer he hadn't said what he'd said. But to some degree, you could say the cat is out of the bag, but I've seen the cat out of the bag on the UFO thing many times before, and they have all the power in the world to just put the lid back on and tell all the media, don't touch any UFO stories except to ridicule them for the next 5 years. And if you're good, we'll give you the first bite of the new narrative. And that could possibly be what happened in 2017 with Leslie Kean et al.'s article. Yeah, that could have just been a deliberately planned step in the narrative. Yeah. I mean, this is interesting. There are hints coming out from insiders saying that amongst the deals we have with the not so nice ETs is a narrative that we need to tell humans about ETs before a particular date. Apparently, and I've heard even people in the current narrative that's coming out indicate, well, we've got to tell humans by 2024 or 2025. And it's a date that I've heard consistently over probably about a decade. No real reason for it, nothing solid on it, otherwise I would have put it in the magazine. But there is a gentle background narrative which suggests possibly this year or next year we have to be told something about UFOs and ETs being real, because they're going to be in our face and we've got to deal with it. And it's more in the sense of a whole lot of being allowed to come here and live on the planet. We've given permission at some level for at least one species of humanoid ETs to come and live on the planet. And are they going to organise that to happen without telling the planet, except for the people in that area? And Africa, by the way, is the preferred continent, which is why I was always curious about that South African movie that came out about the aliens that had landed in South Africa, and the humans were sort of interacting with them, and there was a bit of I forget the name of the movie. I know listeners out there would, but that was set in South Africa with humanoid aliens living sort of like second-class citizens, and there was a whole lot of politics between people and other aliens and stuff. But there is a narrative that we need to tell humans about aliens, because there's going to be a bunch of aliens come and live on the planet on the surface, as opposed to living under the oceans, where a lot of them have already taken up residence. But I've been told by several sources over the years that they're going to be given a significant part of Africa to relocate. Now, in today's day and age, there is enough media control that you could put a few million ETs that look like humans into a part of the Congo or Central Africa and just bribe the local governments to, keep their mouths shut, and and the rest of the planet wouldn't know, wouldn't believe it.
Well, Duncan,
I mean, you could actually do that sort of thing. So maybe what my point is maybe the narrative is we don't have to tell humans, because it's only this lot are going to come and they're going to live there, and why tell the rest of the planet?
Yeah,
when you do take that cork out of the bottle, though, and you tell the planet we're not alone in the universe, ETs have been coming here, the questions are going to be huge. Well, how long have they been coming here for? Do they control politicians? Do they control religions? I mean, the technology, I mean, everything's just going to go ass up. And there's so many implications from disclosing officially they're here that it's going to cause more dramas for them than anything else. So they've either got to have everything under 100% tight control in the future before they disclose, or they've got to be prepared to manage the whole disclosure chaos, somehow use it to their advantage, and then have 100% control. Because the people who are in control now do not want to lose their power.
No, funny about that. Duncan, we have run out of time.
It's been an hour.
Just about. So let's make this a UAP special, and maybe
Sure.
we can come back and talk about the other stories we're going to talk about in a week or two. Is that right with you?
Absolutely fine.